Hi, folks. Let's talk about Gavin Newsom because California's blow-dried Caesar just had a full-on televised tantrum, this time on the Brian Taylor Cohen podcast, which is basically MSDNC for people who still think masks work outdoors. Newsom spent the whole interview warning that Republicans are, get this, too good at politics. Apparently, if you won elections and rolled back bad Democrat policies, that makes you an assassin. This from the guy who turned California into a woke whiplash warning, now panicking because the panic politics playbook isn't working anymore for Democrats. His Botox blame bonanza hit every single note you can imagine, fear, projection, and just straight up zero accountability. So in today's clips, we're getting a front row seat to the meltdown marketing machine where losing power is never the fault of the Democrats because people just don't like their policies or their politicians. No, it's always about your ignorance. You're the one to blame for not voting them into office. Anyway, let's dig in.
It's exhausting. I'm sick of it, and I don't want to be on the receiving end of that anymore. I'm sick and tired of being on our heels. Got to be on our toes. It's not about, fighting back. It's about leaning forward.
Cry about it.
Setting the tone and tenor. I'm sick of this party needs to wake up. These guys aren't screwing around. And I say this not in literal sense, but they're assassins when it comes to the way they weaponize grievance and the way they play politics.
Well, you would know.
Enough. I mean, what more goddamn evidence do we need? Excuse my language. I mean, they've rolled back the last half century. In real time, that's just 6 months. Right. Can you imagine this guy having an additional 42 months with no system of checks and balances, no oversight?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
We'd be back to normal.
The hell else more evidence do you need? This is an existential moment.
The most ironic thing about Gavin's meltdown is that everything he's describing, every accusation, every dramatic warning is actually a confession. It's like watching a man do a struggle session with his own reflection and project the blame onto someone else. He warns that Republicans are assassins with grievance politics, that they're rolling back the last 50 years and that they pose an existential threat with no checks and balances. But let's be honest. That's exactly what Democrats have been doing for the past decade, with him as one of the lead architects of this movement. Now, let's start with grievance politics, something that Democrats would know very well because, in fact, they co-opted it from the communists. They're the ones who brought this into American discourse. For years, Democrats have built entire political platforms on weaponized victimhood, race, gender, climate, COVID, you name it. If you disagree, you're not only wrong, you're racist, homophobic, anti-science, anti-whatever. You're dangerous. Meanwhile, Gavin governed California through emergency powers for over 2 years, issuing unilateral mandates, crushing small businesses, and keeping children masked long after the science collapsed. Gavin wants to talk about checks and balances, right? Well, he closed churches while keeping strip clubs open. Talk about priorities, right? He let violent criminals out of jail under reform while prosecuting people for going to work. That's not oversight. That's autocracy with a progressive coat of paint. And as for rolling back the last century, Democrats have spent the last few years tearing down everything from parental authority to biological reality. In California alone, we've seen bills that push minors toward gender transitions behind their parents' backs. Laws that criminalize assent under the banner of misinformation and endless policies that prioritize criminals over citizens, all calling it progress. By the way, the word progressive is one of the most brilliantly deceptive branding moves of the last century. Democrats hijacked the natural human instinct to associate updates with improvement because we live in a world of software patches, tech upgrades, and constant innovation. So when your phone gets a new feature, it's progress. When your car drives itself, it's progress. So they slapped that same label, that same association on politics and called it progressivism and sold Marxism as if it were some system upgrade. But there's nothing new about these ideas. Forced ideological compliance, centralized power, the erasure of family, tradition, and faith, these are ideologies as old as time, and they don't end in utopia. No, they end in collapse. And you don't need to check out your Bible to see that, though it's all there too. Just look at the fall of the Roman Empire. Open borders, bloated bureaucracy, moral decay, bread and circuses to pacify the masses. It's uncanny. Culture doesn't evolve like technology. Culture is analog. It doesn't update. It either strengthens or decays. And ironically, it's only when culture is stable, anchored in truth, order, and virtue, that we even have the freedom and security to innovate in the first place. But when you replace cultural foundations with ideological experiments, what you get isn't growth. It's chaos, disorder. That's why, as these so-called progressive ideas have gained ground, we've seen an explosion in crime, illiteracy, addiction, fatherlessness, and social dysfunction. Because ideology doesn't evolve, it just implodes. It gives you a new set of problems to deal with, often worse than the ones you had before, if your ideology is less functional than the one you had installed in the first place.
And so Democrats, if we want to have a party, if we want to be functioning, not just as a party, but as a democracy, if we want a system of checks and balances, we believe in the rule of law. If you believe in popular sovereignty. You don't believe in any of that. This is not about popular sovereignty. This guy wants to wire. He tried to break this democracy, try to light it on fire on January 6th. He just made a call to the governor of Texas saying, in this case, not find me the votes, but find me new seats to rig the game.
You're doing the same thing.
If we want to still be in this game, we need to disabuse ourselves, disenthrall ourselves of the status quo in the past. We have got to enter a new mindset, and we've got to get back on this playing field, and we've got to do it with the kind of vigor that our kids and grandkids deserve, that liberty and freedom deserves this moment. The founding fathers deserve the principles that define the best of Roman Republic and Greek democracy. That's on the line unless we stand the line and stand guard of this democracy. And that means we got to go on offense. No more defense, go on offense, fight fire with fire. So you ask me, am I in? I'm all in. You ask me, am I committed? I'm all in, committed and resolved. And so this is not a bluff. This is a moment to be held to a higher level of accountability.
Gavin is the only man who thinks delivering a manic TED Talk in a podcast studio makes him look presidential. But the more he raises his voice and slaps together historical references like Roman Republic and Greek democracy, the more he exposes the vacuum behind his performance. This isn't leadership, it's crisis cosplay. He's trying to rally Democrats with a posture of resolve. But what he's really offering is a polished version of the same one-party decay that has turned California into a warning label for the rest of the country. You see, Gavin's style of governance isn't about checks and balances. It's about unilateral rule dressed up as moral duty. He ruled by emergency order for over 2 years, issued over 500 executive actions during COVID alone, and sidestepped legislative process at every turn. When courts pushed back on his abuse of emergency powers in 2020, he completely ignored them. In case you're wondering, that's not democratic at all. It's just despotic with better hair. Look at the results. Gavin's California now leads the nation in homelessness with over 180,000 people on the streets, despite Gavin spending more than $24 billion on homelessness programs since 2019. Violent crime is up massively in major cities like Los Angeles and Oakland. Nearly half of California residents say they're considering leaving the state, and over 500,000 people have already fled in the past 3 years. The state's public schools rank in the bottom third nationally, and a recent Stanford study showed that 2/3 of California students can't meet grade level math standards. Can you believe that? So when Gavin lectures the rest of the country about freedom and liberty, it's like a pyromaniac offering fire safety tips. So for anyone paying attention, what we're actually watching here is a man who has spent his entire political life insulated by soft media coverage and single-party dominance, trying to imitate the tone of a wartime president because someone, that being Trump, finally pushed back. You see, Republicans are no longer playing defense, and Gavin, who's never had to govern in a real two-party system, is emotionally and intellectually unequipped for this kind of fight. His idea of offense is yelling buzzwords in safe spaces like the Brian Tyler Cohen podcast. He talks like a man leading a movement, but governs like someone guarding a narrative. So much so that the moment that narrative cracks, he doesn't adapt. He just flails like an insane person. And that tells you everything about the modern Democrat leadership class. They can dominate institutions, command headlines, and manufacture consent, but when it comes to actual challenges, they collapse under the weight of their own slogans.
We're trying to play by one set of rules, and these folks on the other side have played by completely different set of rules.
Yeah.
So much so that the President of the United States called Greg Abbott and told him, in essence, find 5 additional seats so we can rig the election next year and maintain the power and authority with the House of Representatives, which de facto amounts to no power, no authority, complete capitulation, so Trump can continue to run roughshod over our rights and liberties.
Gavin is acting like he isn't doing the exact same thing in California, only slower, more bureaucratically, and with better lighting. He's unironically accusing Trump of rigging the election while his own party has spent the last 4 years opening the border wide open, allowing tens of millions of illegal immigrants into the country, then counting them in the census to inflate blue state representation in Congress. That's not democracy. It's demographic manipulation. And in California, Newsom's strategy is even more blatant. His allies in the state legislature are actively pushing redistricting efforts to further entrench one-party rule, stacking commissions with political operatives under the guise of independent oversight and challenging unfavorable maps in court to squeeze every drop of advantage out of an already lopsided system here in California. This is the same man whose political machine tried to erase a legitimate recall effort by changing the rules midstream and using taxpayer-funded mailers to sway the outcome. His outrage isn't moral, folks. It's strategic. Newsom's playing a familiar game. Accuse your opponents of doing what you're already doing, screaming about the collapse of democracy and hoping the media keeps covering for you. But the deeper story here is about institutional decay. The left has so thoroughly rewritten the rules from education to migration to elections that they now mistake their own engineered dominance for legitimacy. And the second that dominance is threatened in any sort of way, they cry foul. Not because democracy is being subverted, but because it might finally start functioning again. Now look, folks, the question isn't even whether Gavin actually believes what he's saying. It's whether you still believe the story you're being sold by Democrats. At what point do we stop mistaking projection for principle? When do we stop calling coordinated manipulation democracy just because it wears a blue tie and smiles on camera? The truth is, power doesn't vanish, it just shifts. And those who scream loudest about threats to the system are often the ones remaking it in their image behind closed doors where you have absolutely no control over it. So are you okay with a political class that rewrites the rules mid-game, then lectures you about fairness? Are you willing to keep pretending that dysfunction is competence, that chaos is progress, that control is compassion? Because the people running the show are counting on your silence, your fatigue, your blind trust. But once you see the strings, the whole performance starts to look very different. So ask yourself, who's really preserving democracy and who's just really good at pretending to want to do that? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.